solve more than 300 cases. And she says when it comes to Nancy Guthrie, she believes investigative genetic genealogy will crack this case.
For months, everyone looked at this case through one terrifying image. A masked man caught on camera, moving through the darkness toward Nancy Guthrie's front door. Armed, gloved, deliberate. That image controlled everything. The Fae, the conversation, the questions. But what if that was never the whole story? What if the real break in this case didn't come from the stranger on camera, but from the people closest to Nancy? What if the mask was actually the safest version of the story? Think about that for a moment. In true crime, we are conditioned to look for the monster we can identify, the face we can put on a poster, the image we can distribute. We look for the visible threat because visible threats have solutions. You find the face, you find the man, you close the case. But some crimes don't work that way. Some crimes aren't built around a stranger walking out of the darkness. Some crimes are built around information, around knowledge, around the quiet, devastating architecture of access. And those crimes, the ones assembled from the inside out, those are the ones that never quite close the way we expect them to. This is not just the story of a masked man at a door. This is the story of everything that had to happen before he got there. Her name was Nancy Guthrie. She was 84 years old. She lived in Tucson, in Pima County, Arizona, a woman of routine, of family dinners, of the kind of ordinary evening rhythms that most people her age build around themselves like a quiet, protective structure. She wasn't a public figure. She wasn't wealthy in any headline-making sense. She was, by all visible accounts, a grandmother living the final chapter of a long, private life. On the morning of February 1st, 2025, authorities responded to her home and found blood on the porch. Nancy Guthrie was gone. The FBI profile that emerged from the investigation was specific. The suspect caught on CCTV was described as a man between 5'9" and 5'10". Average build. He was carrying an Ozark Trail backpack, the kind you'd find at a Walmart, unremarkable, functional, chosen perhaps precisely because it wouldn't stand out. He was masked. He was deliberate. And based on the footage and the evidence at the scene, investigators concluded almost immediately that this was not random. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County said it directly. This was a targeted crime. Nancy Guthrie was not a victim of opportunity. Someone chose her. Someone planned this. And here's where the psychology becomes critical. When an investigation produces a powerful image, a masked figure, a clear silhouette, a face on a wanted poster, that image performs a very specific psychological function. It narrows the imagination. It gives the public a single direction to look. And in doing so, it quietly closes off every other line of inquiry in the collective mind. We see the mask, and we stop asking the quieter questions. We stop asking, how did he know her routine? How did he know the layout of her property? How did he know the vulnerability window, that precise, narrow slice of time when an 84-year-old woman would be alone, at night, in a house that most strangers wouldn't even know existed? A mask is a costume. It covers a face. It does not explain knowledge. Let's go back 24 hours. January 31st, 2025. The evening before Nancy disappeared. Nancy Guthrie had dinner with her daughter, Annie. It was a family dinner, routine, unremarkable, the kind of thing that happens in families across the country every single evening. And when dinner ended, Nancy did not drive herself home. She was driven home by Annie's husband, her son-in-law, Tomaso. Tomaso dropped her off at her home that night. He was, by all accounts, the last known person to see Nancy Guthrie before she vanished. Now, I want you to hold that fact carefully. Not as an accusation. As an investigator's question. Who knew her routine? Who knew when she came and went? Who knew the nights she had dinner with family, and more importantly, who knew the nights she came home alone? Who understood the geography of her property well enough to know where the cameras were, what the sight lines looked like, how long it would take to reach the door from the street. Who knew the vulnerability window? These are not rhetorical questions. These are the questions that separate a surface-level abduction investigation from what this case actually is. This is not an abduction story. This is a knowledge story. The distinction matters enormously. An abduction story centers on the act, the violence, the disappearance, the physical event. A knowledge story centers on the infrastructure that made the act possible. And in a knowledge story, the most important character is never the person holding the weapon. The most important character is the person who held the information. Someone built a map of Nancy Guthrie's life. Her evenings. Her returns. Her home. Her routines. And that map, assembled quietly, over time, without any visible urgency, is what made February 1st possible. The masked man didn't create that map. He was given it. Nancy had 2 daughters, Savannah and Annie. In the days and weeks following Nancy's disappearance, their public behavior told 2 completely different stories. Savannah became the face of the search. She appeared publicly. She gave interviews. She made statements. She drove the media attention and kept the case visible in a news cycle that, like all news cycles, has a very short memory. She was present. She was vocal. She was the grieving daughter that the public narrative needed. And in those early days, her language was exactly what you would expect. Urgent. Desperate. The language of someone who believes that rescue is still possible. We need to find her. Please come forward. She's out there somewhere. The grammar of hope. But something changed. By February 24th, less than 4 weeks after Nancy vanished, analysts and investigators paying close attention to Savannah's public statements noticed a linguistic evolution that was, to put it plainly, premature. The language of urgency had softened. The grammar of hope had shifted toward something else. Something that sounded less like a search and more like a preparation. The words weren't announcing a breakthrough. They were anticipating a loss. Why did Savannah's language change before the public was ready for it to change? That is not a small question. In missing persons cases, the language used by family members is analyzed carefully. Not because grief is suspicious, but because language is behavior. And behavior, especially under extreme psychological pressure, tends to reflect what a person actually knows, not just what they've been told. Now, contrast Savannah with Annie. Annie, the daughter who had dinner with her mother the night before she disappeared. Annie, whose husband drove Nancy home. Annie, who in the weeks following the disappearance remained almost entirely absent from the public narrative. Silence is not proof. But silence is behavior. And then came the detail that sharpened everything. Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly cleared the family. He said it clearly, the family was not considered suspects. But simultaneously, investigators executed a search of Annie and Tomaso's home. Both things happened. At the same time. A public clearing. A private search. That convergence, that contradiction held together by the careful language of institutional silence, is one of the most telling details in this entire case. Because law enforcement doesn't search the homes of people they have truly cleared. They search the homes of people they haven't finished examining. The cumulative weight of these details does not point in one clean direction. But it creates a shape. And the shape is not random. Let's bring the threads together. The Savannah thread and the Tomaso thread do not exist in isolation. Placed side by side, they form the outline of something that investigators, and anyone paying serious attention to this case, cannot afford to ignore. Sheriff Nanos said this was deliberate. Targeted. Not opportunistic. Those words carry enormous weight. Because if this crime was deliberately targeted, then it was planned. And if it was planned, then the planning required information. Specific, intimate, operational information. Information about a routine. About a house. About a family dinner. About a drop-off. The masked man at the door was devastatingly effective. He appeared, he acted, and he disappeared. No witnesses. No confrontation. Clean, controlled, efficient. That level of operational effectiveness in a targeted crime against a private individual in a residential neighborhood does not emerge from nothing. It emerges from preparation. And preparation, at that level of detail, requires a source. The masked man is not the beginning of this story. He is the visible end of a larger chain. That chain, if it exists, runs backward through the night of February 1st, through the drop-off on January 31st, through the family dinner, through the routines and the rhythms and the quiet architecture of an 84-year-old woman's ordinary life. And somewhere along that chain, someone made a decision. Not an impulsive decision. Not a decision made in anger or panic. A calculated decision. Assembled over time. Executed with precision. The darkest theory of the Guthrie case is not that a stranger chose Nancy at random. The darkest theory is that she was chosen by someone who already knew her. And that the masked man was simply the instrument of someone else's knowledge. As of March 2026, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The investigation remains open. The FBI is still involved. And the evidence that has emerged in the months since her disappearance has only deepened the complexity of the case rather than resolved it. Investigators have identified mixed DNA at the scene, genetic material that has not yet produced a confirmed match or a public arrest. Mixed DNA in a crime scene context typically points toward more than one actor. It suggests coordination. It reinforces the accomplice angle that investigators quietly acknowledged in the early stages of the inquiry. There is also the matter of internet disruptions. In the neighborhood surrounding Nancy's home, in the window around February 1st, there were documented disruptions in local internet connectivity. That detail, by itself, means very little. But in the context of a planned, targeted crime, in the context of a perpetrator who may have wanted to prevent alarm systems and smart devices from functioning or transmitting, it becomes something worth holding. And then there's the invisible pressure chamber. Think about what it means to live inside partial knowledge. To know something, or to suspect something, that you cannot say out loud. To exist inside a family where the questions are never fully asked and the answers are never fully given. To watch a public investigation unfold in real time while carrying the weight of what you privately understand. That is the psychological reality of this case for anyone in Nancy Guthrie's inner circle. Savannah's words changed before the public was ready. Before the evidence justified that shift. Before any official announcement gave her permission to grieve rather than search. Words don't change like that by accident. Words change because the mind that produces them has already moved to a place the world hasn't caught up to yet. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The masked man is still unidentified. The chain, if it exists, is still intact. And somewhere, in the silence between what is said publicly and what is known privately, the truth of what happened on February 1st is waiting. Not in the footage of a man at a door. In the knowledge that put him there.